180 for the last 1 to 2 years. So those who have the capacity, or any industry have the capacity to earn in dollars, will have the main advantage, mainly in the service sector, especially for IT companies. Even some of the freelancers who are doing on freelance work on services, they will have the advantage. On the manufacturing side, of course, they will have some advantage, but sometimes when they are planning to secure the supply chains like fuel, electricity, and some of the raw materials, they may face challenges. But if they can find a solution, I mean, if they have some way of sorting it out, because we know already things like fuel, there's an option that they can directly buy it with their dollar reserves. So if they can manage, those industries will also have a massive opportunity. But overall, it's all the industries who are mainly having flexibility will be the added advantage. But at the same time, in terms of sector-wise and industries-wise, again, the micro and small medium enterprises, some will get affected, but of course, some will have an advantage again, because sometimes the larger corporations, when when the structure is so heavy, your flexibility and agility is low. But for micro and small medium enterprises, they can adjust quite quickly. So they will have some opportunities, because and some of the large corporations, because of their agility issues, when they lose businesses, people will also consider the micro and small medium enterprises who could provide a similar kind of service, maybe not as the expert level that they bring in, but with the affordability, those sectors will have an advantage. Additionally, I think sectors like education now, which has been badly affected with schools closing down and things like that, those sectors will have an impact, especially like online education, other education options. People will look at those options when they consider. So overall, that's my overview in terms of industries which will have a potential in moving forward.
That's very insightful. Thank you, Mr. Danath. Just a quick question on the service sector that you mentioned. So you said, like, is it a good time for digital startups? Do you think that, or is it not a great time to going ahead with the startups?
It depends on what is the business context that you are looking at. But I mean, if you have the resource capacity and the scope to do that, I think it's a good time, because when you have the capacity, and especially based on your clientele, if you have a focus on overseas operations, so providing services in where you can earn a dollar revenue, then of course you have a big opportunity. But even if it's local, I think some of those bigger companies, that when they can't afford, they will join like the digital space as well. So I think you will have an opportunity. But again, like, what's the investment that you're looking at, how much you should invest, those things will be pretty much depend on a case-by-case scenario. But I think world will anyway moving towards digital, but this will also a good opportunity to capitalize on that when it comes to the digital infrastructure and things like that.
Great. Thank you very much for your answers, Mr. Danath. And now let's get on with Mr. Channa Gunawardana, the CEO of Explologics Private Limited. Mr. Channa, let's talk about logistic bottlenecks, right? So how bad is the global situation, and how can Sri Lankan business plan their logistics? That's a major concern for all the business who are dealing with logistics. And what are your views on that and your thoughts?
Yeah, if you look at logistics bottlenecks to start with, bottlenecks can happen. I mean, any given period, even under normal circumstances, meaning where there's no war, or where there's no COVID, or where there's no pandemic, whatever, there could be bottlenecks. But we have been experiencing over the last 3-4 years either bottlenecks resulting in from these unusual situations out of ordinary. So we had the COVID, now we had the Ukraine war, which is having a severe impact on logistics, as you all know. I mean, if we have been reading, even Sri Lanka, our tea exports is severely affected into Ukraine and that part of the world. And if you look at the global context, I believe they have just signed up some treaty where they will allow the wheat exports to move out of from Ukraine, but that has ran into some problem on the first day itself. So, I mean, there are all sorts of bottlenecks all over the world. Now this is in addition to the typical shipping related bottlenecks that we have been experiencing over the last 2 years or slightly over 2 years, where, for example, the US East Coast and the US West Coast congestion, which has had a severe impact on all of us. Now, the recent situation is that it has now moved more towards the East Coast ports like New York, Savannah from the West Coast ports, but then, overall situation has slightly improved. If you look at, we all knew what was happening in China, the Shanghai port closure and the South China port issues. And then, of course, even now to date, there are certain instances, there are situations in places like Port of Hamburg, labor problems and so on. So there's no end to it. So if you look at the situation, say maybe 5 to 8 years ago, the situation is more volatile now. And, all these pandemics, the wars have dealt severe blows into the whole scenario of logistics. So getting back to the other part of the question, how can Sri Lankan business plan for their logistics? Few things there we can do is you need to start, if you are especially into exports or imports, especially into exports, you need to start working with companies who they can give you solutions. Now, the tendency of any exporter or importer any given time is to, of course, the price matters a lot. You tend to focus a lot on the cost factor, the price, the freight cost, and so on. I think the time has come to, whilst having focus on that, it's important to focus on companies who can give you solutions, not just the cheapest rate. For example, if you are tied up with a party who's predominantly serving a part of the globe or a part of the region, it's better for you to start working with a company like a logistics player who can give you a lot of options, right? And the second most important thing is you got to start with start working with partners who can provide you market intelligence and who has access to data. I mean, intelligence is not, anybody can go and browse. Even today, you can go to internet and see what's happening in the world as far as the ports are concerned. Not that. Here we are talking about predicting the future based on the information that you have, based on intelligence you have. There are companies who can give you that intelligence apart from, giving you the basic freight cost. So that intelligence is very important because that's coming from the experts in the industry, not just what is appearing on the internet. Then, of course, the other thing is you got to look at new ways of doing business, new business models. For example, predominantly, if you look at a lot of exporters who are working here, especially people who are into apparels, their freight decisions are not taken here. The freight is decided by their customers, the end buyers, right? It could be port to port to their CFS or port to the distribution center. It could be air freight, ocean freight, combination. So new business models mean you got to evaluate the options of sending shipments to a particular distribution point. For example, in Europe, in North America, holding it there and then distributing into the final consignees. I know the cost factor is there. Holding stocks in Europe and distribution, there is a cost involved. Some of the companies in Sri Lanka I have noticed, including the clients that I deal with, they have kind of convinced the consignees to change the way they ship, the Incoterms. Some of them have converted from FOB to CIF, where they take the call here, and then they send it to a particular selected destination, say in Europe or US, and from there they deliver to the final consignee. So the advantage is there you can put a lot of consignees cargo into a particular container or to a single shipment, and you have it at your distribution at the destination, and then you deliver it from there. So these are the things that you can you got to think out of the box. in these situations, because these things have come to stay. I mean, you can't, I mean, it could be a war tomorrow, it could be another pandemic. Now we have another thing coming up, similar to COVID. So you have to be agile, you have to think on your feet. So the other most important thing is there are these traditional mindsets, like, for example, holding stocks. There's a cost involved. People now, I mean, if you look at the last decade or so, people have been talking of just-in-time deliveries. You can't be holding stocks. There's something that you should not pursue. But look at what's happening in the recent past, right? So you tend to continue that model, and you rely on just-in-time delivery. For example, importing of raw materials for your production, say if you're into apparels, right? So you depend on that model, and because of the volatility and these bottlenecks and so on, you can't find freight, you can't find aircraft, you can't find ships. So sometimes cargo which should have arrived on ocean freight at a cheaper cost, you end up paying by air freight, and sometimes you charter aircrafts. So why not you hold stocks? Why not you bring your stocks and hold it here? Because the thing is, you sometimes tend to look at in a very traditional mindset. Okay, holding stock, do I have to have warehouses? No, you don't have to have your warehouses. There are specialized players. You don't have fixed costs. It can be variable.
True.
So one has to think on those lines if you're going to plan as far as logistics concerned.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chanda. That was very insightful. But a little question on like the rising cost that you kept on mentioning on your answer. Like obviously the freight costs and even the holding up on the stocks, like it's rising, right? So like how crucial this rising cost and battling this problem for the new exporters from Sri Lanka, like how crucial is to plan it, and how well can they plan it? Is there any subsidies from the government sides or anything of that sort?
I'm not aware of any direct subsidies as such, but there are various initiatives from the EDB. I mean, if you're part of a particular export association, it's very important that you get into those associations, having a dialogue with EDB and all. Then you get indirect benefits. There are, for example, like Rubber Exporters Association, the Tea Exporters Association. Sometimes you tend to work in isolation where you don't get into those associations, but those associations have benefits. That's one way of looking at it, right? Then I'm not sure whether there are any negotiations happening in terms of freight and all that, but and then you can look at these treaties, special trade agreements, and you can target those if you're a startup. There are beneficial trade agreements between Sri Lanka and, for example, India and the region. Which sometimes what I feel is that that knowledge is not widely available to the startups. So it's very important that you reach up to places like EDB, sometimes even BOI, to get that knowledge and really fine tune your efforts.
Right.
Freight cost, of course, it has come down a bit. It is not as expensive as what it was like 6 months back. But it will not come to a level of what it was like 3-4 years ago, at least in the near future.
Thank you very much for that answer, Mr. Chanda. My next question is for Mr. Danath. And Mr. Danath, so as we are discussing about the export and export development, this question is based on that. So everyone speaks about it, but even export sectors are dependent on import commodities, right? So what policies do we need to change it to actually facilitate this change?
So mainly the exports are becoming better when you are competitive, because you should be able to compete in global markets. So your quality has to be good and your prices has to be competitive. So to make the prices competitive, your raw materials, you should be able to access it at the lowest possible price or like the competitive price. Then only you can keep your price of the final product at competitive rates. So in that sense, where it is important, where you need imports also for exports. Now, for an example, everyone generally says, okay, look at our apparel sector. They are the main exporter, but they are also the main importer. So why can't we, stop their imports and asking them to, whatever their inputs, in Sri Lanka. For an example, if it's a shirt manufacturing company, I'm just taking as an example. So basically, they are importing their fabric, their like plastic buttons, everything, threads, yarn, everything from overseas. And then they stitch it here and export. So people are asking, okay, why can't we produce this button in Sri Lanka? So then we don't need to import that button. That is a good idea, as long as you can produce this button at the same rate that you can buy it from the global market. Because if that button is like 2 times higher the price from the global market, if I were to manufacture it here, and if I manufacture it here and like use that button, the price of my shirt will increase. And when the price of my shirt increases, I may not be able to compete in the world market, because now the entire product cost is increased, and probably someone from Bangladesh or someone in Ethiopia will be able to compete at a better rate, at a better price to my buyer. So of course I will lose the order, and not I will lose the order, my button manufacturer will also suffer after some time, because when I lose the order, my button manufacturer will also lose the order. So that's where this import export thing coming in. And that's just sometimes when people don't understand it, they say either, okay, you stop the imports and you do it, you manufacture it here, you call it like value additions and things like that. But that's one way to look at it. But the solution for this is, you have to be open for competition, and you have to be competitive, because only when you are competitive, you improve your productivity and efficiency. That's the big component. So what we recommend is, as a solution, you allow the button manufacturer to import buttons, but it doesn't mean that you are not asking our local button manufacturers not to manufacture buttons. You have to basically do both. So when you bring it down at a reasonable rate, then only my local manufacturer will also try to compete and manufacture buttons at the same rate. And if he can compete, he will not only have like the Sri Lankan exporters as their client, they can do the same thing overseas. And that's how you become like an export hub. So to happen that, of course, you have to allow competition. That's one side. And second, what you need to do is, now what is the fear factor is that people are slightly concerned that this will have a lot of since the China and all them have like crazy cheaper rates on manufacturing, whether that will our businesses have to close down. If it's cheaper, you have no other option, because of course they have a competitive advantage. But if there's an anti-competitive trade practices taking place, what we need is ideally in other countries as well, there's called competition commission. So basically you are making the competition, or like you're making a level playing field, but basically you can't avoid competition, because businesses based on competition, any business is the same. You have so many players, you allow everyone to compete in a level playing field, but you really can't avoid the competition, saying okay, because he's competing with me, you have to stop him. It's like if I'm running a bakery, I can't say, okay, in my area, I should be the only baker. The others have to has to stop their baking process.
That's true.
So that's the argument. So all the reforms on economic front that we need to do to make sure competition, we have to do. So one is basically you're allowing it to trade, and also I think main reform that we need is also this with the exchange rate, because now what we are doing is we are keeping the exchange rate artificially low. So basically you are encouraging importers to bring more at a very low price, because you are subsidizing your dollar by pumping more dollars into the market. But actually if you allow it to fluctuate to an extent, then actually automatically your prices when you import goes up, because your dollar, you have to pay a higher price. So actually this import exports has a big component on like the regulation side, and of course on the trade policy side, and of course very importantly on the monetary side, or like the exchange rate side. When you do it all together, you will see better results. But overall, my suggestion is that you leave you allow the trade to happen, but you manage it through the exchange rate. Then you will not have a bigger impact on your dollar outflow, because then when it becomes expensive, automatically the demand will come down. That's what we need to do in short and medium term.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much, Mr. Danat. Like, that was very insightful. Moving on, I have the next question for Mr. Shanda. So I think, Mr. Shanda, we already touched upon this a little bit from our previous question as well. But let me put it in a more specific manner. So we already spoke about the soaring costs of logistics, about the freights and about the inventory management and everything. But how do you see this affecting the Sri Lankan exports as an industry and our competency in the world market? How do you see this?
Yes, naturally, when your shipping cost or your freight cost goes up, it adds up to your total cost. Your cost of your product goes up, right? And what happens is that the other problem is when you're not certain about what's happening, what's going to happen, say 1 month, 2 months down the line. How do you predict? How do you cost in the first place? How do you cost your product? So those challenges are there, and honestly, I mean, I don't see a real way out of it, but what exporters or what people who are involved in trading, what they need to focus in situations like this is you focus on what is controllable, right? I mean, if you look at the freight cost, the freight cost is if you are competing with some, say, Chinese manufacturer, say example, an apparel manufacturer, his freight cost to say the same port, say in New York, say if you are shipping something from Shanghai to New York or say Shanghai to Los Angeles, most of the time his freight cost is higher than from Sri Lanka to Los Angeles. Obviously, for reasons related to geography and the shipping routes and so on. So it's not that the shipping cost is only the freight cost is only increased high in Sri Lanka, but for your competitor also it's high. So meaning it's not a real controllable factor. You can negotiate and reduce, say 5%, 10%, but you can't reduce 20%, 30%. So in such scenarios, what you need to focus is your controllables. The first thing is, to my knowledge, what is best is you focus on your core and outsource your rest. Especially if you are a small time, the startup or a small business, small organization, you focus on your core, meaning your manufacturing, your production, and so on. So outsource the rest. So for example, if you are trying to do your own shipping, outsource. There are logistics companies who does it for you at a cost, but that cost, mind you, is variable. If you're going to maintain your card, if you're going to maintain the rest of the office and all that, it's going to be fixed. So that fixed cost drags you down, right? And you have to be agile. There comes outsourcing. I mean, even if you are a large organization, you can't be having fleet of trucks. I mean, those are things considered as things that has to be there when, let's look at 5 or 6 years ago, right? You got to have your transport fleet, you got to have a shipping department and all that. Those are traditional way of looking at it. Now things have evolved. There are specialized people who will do for you at a per job cost, which is a variable. So that means so that you have to go for that agileness, right? Third most important thing is collaboration, right? So that's something that we generally shy away from. We don't want to even collaborate with the similar supplier. Look at a situation where there are multiple suppliers, right, shipping to a same buyer in another country. There are a lot of ways that you can collaborate. For example, there are certain services offered by freight forwarders where they consolidate part shipments, small shipments of these. Say for example, there is a particular buyer, say in US, and he is supplying from A, B, C, D. So he buys from all these parties, right? The forwarder's role is to consolidate all these shipments into one particular consolidated container, and they send it to the final buyer. Usually what happens is all these suppliers send their own transport to the consolidation point, or we call the CFS, using their own transport. Now, why not you get the forwarder? Why not four of you all collaborate and get the forwarder to do it for you? Now, look at the transport cost these days. Look at the cost of finding fuel. Look at the effort, right? Why not you just leave that hassle to the freight forwarder, because that's or whoever who deals with you, or the logistics company. He can take that hassle away from you. So you got to be agile and you got to be smart. You got to focus on your core, and you just basically outsource the rest. The other point is, of course, is what I highlighted earlier also. You got to look at certain things you saw as costly, like holding stocks. These just-in-time deliveries really gives you that benefit, or isn't it worthwhile? Because some people, when you look at some companies, how they look at is, when you say you got to hold your stuff, they always think of, okay, do we have to have warehouse? We have to build warehouses. We have to hire warehouses. No, you don't have to do that. There are specialized 3PL companies who does it for you at a per job cost. So it's again a variable. So you got to look at things differently, because freight cost is something beyond you, and there's a limit that you can negotiate. I mean, if you are a large player, of course you had the luxury of negotiating with shipping lines, even going to the freight forwarders and get the best deal. Still you are maybe $300-400 cheaper than the other company in Sri Lanka. But then that's how many such large players are there? Majority are SMEs. So that's how I see it.
It's true. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chanda, for that answer. So moving on, I have the next question lined up for Mr. Danath. This is a very interesting question. Mr. Danath, we are going to talk about the global economy. And overall, the global economy is also going through tough times, as we know, because there is a war happening and the pandemic is still on, and a lot of major economies are also struggling, right? So how bad will this situation be for Sri Lanka if the IMF plan doesn't come through? And what do you think the businesses should brace for?
Yeah, so the global economic crisis, I think we have two options. I think there's two parts in that question. What would be the impact for Sri Lanka with the global economic crisis? The second part is, what if not the IMF?
Exactly.
So in terms of global economic crisis, I think there are pros and cons. Cons are basically, as you know, we are already struggling, and when the global markets also are struggling, then again we are finding it very difficult. But the pro side is, when some markets are struggling, that will also create opportunities for emerging markets like us, because then the supply chain starts sometimes shifting. People are considering different options. So we will have a chance with the global recession, but when the overall demand contracts, that will have an impact. And especially, as you have seen, the US Federal Reserve, now they are increasing the interest rates. So our exchange rate and all that have a problem. So that's why it's very, very important for us to do those economic reforms to manage this crisis. Because if we do the crisis, then we have a golden opportunity to become a tiger economy. Because now, when the interest rates are increased by the Federal Reserves, countries like Dubai, they are not going to affect, because they have the system to manage it. They have monetary policy adjusting accordingly. But our one is not. We don't have a proper monetary policy in the first place, and we don't have independence in the central bank. So when you fix those things, actually, this become a golden opportunity if we play our cards right. Now, I think, but what is generally said is, Sri Lanka has never missed the opportunity to miss the bus. So every time when there's a change in the change in these dynamics, we never captured that. For example, there was one point, there were supply chains moving away from China because of that China-US trade war. And the biggest winner was mainly countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand. They won it. We and India, we couldn't do anything. And even if you look at the recent statistics, India, their poverty rates, they have about 25%, but they are, closer to South India, Kerala is one of the, in terms of their income, they are one of the wealthiest states compared to other parts of India. So we are just next door, but we can't trade and we don't have a product to sell to them. And there's a massive market. So these changes we have to capitalize. So even in the global supply chain changes, we can capitalize, but we have to play our cards right. That's the impact on the global economy. IMF, Now the IMF situation, in my view, is they want us to do the debt restructuring first, which is sensible. That's their policy. When a country is bankrupt or when their debt is not sustainable, they can't give us money. So they have asked, look, you go and restructure your debt. And when only the restructure our debt, IMF will come to assist. And when only IMF come to assist, the other countries will come and say, okay, we will support you as well. So for IMF to assist us, we have to get the debt restructuring going. For us to get the debt restructuring going, we have to have some political stability. So it's like a chain reaction. When you're delaying it on one front, if the political instability delaying it, then our debt restructuring will be delayed, IMF program will be delayed, the recovery period will be delayed. So we have to have all the boxes parallelly somehow managing it. If we don't get the IMF support, then in my view, we will become it's not because of the IMF support. If we fail to do reforms, then we will mainly finding it very difficult to do overcome this crisis, and we will become a failed state. At the same time, if we do the reforms, we will become a tiger economy. That's why I said we are at crossroads. Either we become a tiger economy or either we become a failed state. But all depends on whether are we willing and open to do the reforms and do those changes. And as Chandra said, there are so many things in trade side that we can do. So we have to unleash those markets to move forward. And this is a wonderful time because people are open for change. Because people know we are suffering. People know that we need public transport. We have to make sure that our fuel efficiency is better in even our vehicles that we use because fuel prices are increasing. So people are open for change, but they can't bring the change themselves. When they try to bring the change themselves, the main thing that they can do is come to the roads and protest and say, we are not happy with the program that you are going with. And when they try to do it quite often, you are basically destabilizing the entire country. They have given the message quite clear, loud and clear, that they are not happy with this system. So when they are not happy with the system, you have to bring those changes and then make sure and capitalize on that moment. If you do it only, we will become a tiger economy. However, I'm still hopeful that we can do that. But just being hopeful won't do the changes. Someone really need to roll the sleeves and get the work done, get the act together. So that's my overall view, Anujan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Danath. That was very insightful and interesting. All right. So we are going for the final question for today's session. And that is for Mr. Channa. Mr. Channa, Sri Lanka as a trading hub, how much of it is threatened with the current crisis? And what can businesses do to fight it? Is the answer in better digitalization, or is there lies another answer?
Yeah, when you say a hub status, we are recognized. If you look at I will take from the shipping point of view. We are as we all know, we are a transshipment hub, right? Our income from the Sri Lanka Ports Authority, the port-related activities, a bulk of it, a good share of it is coming from the transshipments. So that is threatened. Why I say it is threatened is that if you look at what has been happening during the last 1 month, we had a lot of political turmoil, instability, and all the shipping agents, direct officers here, some of the freight forwarding companies who are operating from here, there are a lot of questions from the principals and asking, and I know there are a lot of shipping lines who were on the verge of pulling out certain services out from Sri Lanka. Right. So if that were to happen, as you all know, right now, after a lot of, shipping lines coming together, strategic alliance and all that, there are about 3 or 4 main shipping lines who are entirely controlling the entire shipping, the shipping lines business. So if one of those consortiums were to pull out from Sri Lanka, not only that our own exporters are going to lose their ability to send shipments, mind you, we are a hub mainly to Bangladesh and into India also. So a lot of their cargo comes here and then shipped out. So when you say hub, the first thing comes to the mind is the shipping hub, the transshipment hub, and that is threatened even now. So there are a lot of struggle, and I must say shipping agents and shipping direct officers here are doing a phenomenal job in retaining those services. Sometimes the principals tend to wonder. They don't even believe, when you have a fuel crisis outside, when you see queues for running into kilometers and miles sometimes. They can't sometimes believe everything is happening well inside the port. So in that sense, I think we must commend the Port Authority also to, despite all the threatening of these labor unions and all that, they're not letting those get into the port and maintaining the status quo as it is today, right? That's on the shipping related thing. Then you have got the trading hub. As you know, we have Sri Lanka there are 3 recognized license free zones where they have started. They are doing a lot of activities like value additions and minor manufacturing and so on. So that Hub Act came into being, and that Hub Act, based on the Hub Act, people have invested. So that's an area where Sri Lanka can grow much further. You can do a lot of things here. Now, with this political instability, what's going to happen is they are looking at those through microscope, right? So we are not only the hub, we are not only a hub, we are not the only hub rather here. I mean, we have Singapore is huge, Dubai is huge. So why do they have to come to Sri Lanka? It's not that we don't have the geographical advantage, because Dubai is somewhere else, Singapore is towards the east side. So we geographically we had that hub benefit. It's a given thing, but how you capitalize on it. So when you have political instability, nobody will be interested to hub here. Whether it's a shipping hub, trading hub, or education hub. Some time ago, I think if you look at 10 years down the line in the past, we had this 5+1 hub concept. It was documented from the government side. And they have articulated it well, I must say. But then again, the implementation, there are a lot of question marks on that. Then the other thing, getting back to the question, that's at a larger level, right? So if you look at from a shipping hub, logistics hub point per se, we need to ensure the facilities are in place. We have to have world-class facilities inside the port. For example, products like multi-country consolidation, where you bring a lot of cargo from different origins and hub here. For that, you have to have state-of-the-art facilities. And of course, last but not least, the digitization. The digital aspects of it has to happen, right? When you say digitization, is that we have, if you look at the last couple of years, we have seen automation taking place as far as the customs is concerned. Sri Lanka Ports Authority, it has happened. But what's important is that when you look at the total logistics process, those systems has to talk to each other, right? Otherwise, it cannot happen in isolation. For example, you go to port and get your work done online, but you go to customs, they don't know what has happened at the port. So that connection has to happen. That's where the digitization has to come in. That has to move to the next level. Then, of course, the other most important thing is there are recent initiatives that they talk of a port community system and an airport community system. I think the initial feasibility studies are done, but again, unfortunately, with this current political scenario, it has come to a standstill. The community system is where all the stakeholders related to port or airport operates in one ledger. You correspond in one platform. So everybody knows what's happening with the other party, which is very well happening in places like India and even at our region. Of course, in the West, it's very common. So we need to move in. Those are the digital related initiatives. We need to move in, whether it's a shipping hub or a trading hub. So that's my answer to that. Yes, digitalization is important, but that's not the only thing. Political stability, and the other point is your policies. You have to be consistent in your policies. You cannot change a policy from regime to regime. Then how can you talk of a hub?
That's
people
true.
coming to work, people, overseas companies or investors moving to a hub, looking at the long term. So if your policies are changing, how can they be consistent? How can you expect them to be consistent? So those are the important things.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chanda. So like when it comes to digitization, it also has to have a certain amount of consistency, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, gents. So like that is bringing us to the closure with the questions that we have. But as you all know that we are going live on YouTube and we are going live on Facebook, and we have few questions from our viewers. And there is actually an interesting question from a Facebook viewer, and it is for Mr. Danath. Mr. Danath, the question is, how long will it take for the economy to get back on track? Especially given that now even US is talking of a recession. The US, like, who is like driving the entire economy of the world, they are talking about a recession, right? So like the question is based on that, like how long will it take for the economy to get back on track globally?
This is a often question that I get because everyone wanted to know when can we end the fuel queues and when probably we can go back to the normal lifestyle. Again, sorry, I don't have like a solid answer. It all depends on how fast that we do our reforms or changes. If we do the changes, generally it says it will take about 5 to 6 years to bounce back. It doesn't mean that you have to stay in like fuel queues for 5 years. If you come to an IMF agreement, some things will be back to normal. But the economy to recover, generally it takes 5 to 6 years. Generally, it is called a lost decade. When what I have learned and read is when there's a sovereign default takes place, it's equal to civil war. So it takes 10 years to bounce back, because as you can see, we are still in the stage of shrinking the economy. So when the economy is shrinking, it is, it's as the same as a business. It will take like a couple of seconds to make a mistake and completely collapse your business. But it takes about, it takes long time to build a business. So when the economy starts shrinking, it takes time to again recover. So generally it's called a lost decade. But I think if we do the reforms, it will take about 5-6 years at least to get some stability. But important thing is we should not get confused on two things. Sometimes when the economy is shrinking, people are getting adjusted to that. So it doesn't mean that you're recovering. Now, for an example, a lot of people have adjusted to public transport and all that. That is good. But of course, you are adjusting to worse conditions. And sometimes you may not feel actually there's a crisis. It doesn't mean that you have recovered. Basically, you have adjusted to that. What I mean is, as Chandra said, to make it like a global, supply chain hub, and to really, we are talking about really improving our income levels and moving forward with as a dynamic economy. To do that, I'm talking about 6 to 7 or 10 years. We can always, as human beings, we can always adjust. We have been through that difficult time in the history. So that's a different thing. Don't get that confused. Our adjustability and ability to adapt to difficult environment conditions is not what I mean. I mean to really make it a dynamic economy.
That's great. Danath, hold on. I have another question to you as well from a YouTube viewer. And it's a very interesting question. Like, a recent comment from a leading economist said, we are having a champagne diet on a Kasipu income. Do you agree?
I think I have to agree because we have been spending beyond our means. I mean, it's like individuals, because our government was not earning enough to spend. So what they did was they borrowed it from the central bank. And the government have that option now. If I have to spend more than I earn, I have to borrow it from the bank or some friend, but it will have like limited space. Because if I borrow it from, for an example, Anushan or from Channa, of course, Channa and Anushan at one point will come and ask me, hey, look, you borrowed me this amount, give my money back, maybe with interest or without interest. But the governments have the capacity to do it, borrow it from the central bank. Of course, you have to pay, but you can literally run the printing machine and pay. But there are so many complications when you do that. Your inflation is increasing, and then when the inflation is increasing, you are basically destabilizing the entire economy. So, like as the question, of course, we have been having like a champagne dinner on a Kasipu income. So that is right. So that Kasipu income is basically the government's revenue. So that difference of a Kasipu income and a champagne dinner was financed generously by our central bank. And when central banks does that, you experience what we go through. You face shortages and you have inflation at 50-60 range. So that is what is happening.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Danath. Mr. Shanna, I have a question for you as well. There is a question about the ports. Beyond the port of Colombo, which is a very like a modern and very busy port of our country, are there any other ports around Sri Lanka which we can maximize the productivity? Of course, there are a few. Do you think that way?
Yeah, immediately looking at the infrastructure, you have the Hambantota port. Right now, what's happening is that they are focusing on more on the vehicle transshipment. So you have vehicle carrying vehicles, the Ro-Ro vessels calling to discharge, as well as nowadays, of course, not to discharge because we don't bring any vehicles in. So it's the transshipment. So for meaning there are leading shipping lines globally who discharge their vehicles at the Hambantota port, and then there are other shipping line who comes in, calls the Hambantota port, and carry those vehicles to other places like South Africa, for example, the African continent. Because again, getting back to the earlier question, where we are as a hub, so that's a classic example of our hub status being used by other countries, which we can develop further. I believe the container facilities are also working at Hambantota port, but to what extent we are really using that is a question mark. But yes, if you look at the ports other than Colombo, what's readily available is Hambantota at the moment. Trincomalee also is there. Their bulk discharging facilities are there for commodities like cement, which is already happening. So those are the two ports apart from Colombo. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shanna. Mr. Danath, I have another question for you, which is coming directly from Charaka Pereira, who is with us on this Zoom live session, and he's asking about a bit of a long question. It says, although we are facing a forex shortage, the country has not reduced the import expenditure on non-essentials such as finished garments, electrical appliance, furnitures, etc., which is over 600 million USD, he says, and which can be utilized to import several full shipments of food and medicine. So shouldn't the government suspend those items as well, at least for 1 year? This is what he's asking. What is your answer to that, Danath?
Yeah, sure. So how I see it is slightly differently. Let me try to explain this. Now, most of the people think this problem is an import problem because of we imported more, that we are having a dollar shortage. At the surface level, that is how it looks like, right? For anyone, it looks obvious that you don't have dollars because you are importing, and to import you need dollars. So we have imported too much and we don't have dollars. But we need to understand, I import on rupees, right? I import in the sense, if I buy a mobile phone, I pay it in rupees to my mobile phone like seller, and that seller in the second round may be going into his agent in rupees, and that rupees they will try to convert to dollars and import. So that import, if someone gives me more and more rupees, there's a higher chance that I will import more and more. And let's look at, that's one side. And let's look at the other side. Now, just hypothetically, let's say we export $100, right? So for an example, China exports $100. So $100 comes to our bank. So hypothetical scenario, I can only import anything for an amount of $100 unless I borrow from someone else. So if I don't borrow, my bank, all the banks together, can only provide me $100 only. There's no other way unless they borrow it from someone else. So what should happen ideally in that case is, imagine there are people who are lining for like import things for $200 or $500, and then the price of a dollar should go up. So only the people who have the capacity to buy that dollar at like that market rate at very high rate will only have to have the space to buy that $100. And then only that $100 import will come for the exports that we have done for $100. So ideally the system should balance, right? If we don't borrow money. So there's this misperception that imports is a problem. Of course, imports become a problem when you face this sort of a crisis level, because now you really don't have anything, because we are not starting the game on a blank sheet now. What I said is practical if you are starting everything in zero, but now it's not zero. You have already borrowed like 51 billion worth of dollars. You have already suspended the debt. So now it's complicated. But though it's complicated, the fundamentals remains as it is, because it is not an import problem. It has become an import problem because we have kept the dollar rate artificially low. Because what we have been doing is we have kept the dollar at 200 rupees, not only 200, earlier it was at 100 rupees, 130 rupees, 150 rupees, 180 rupees. We have kept it artificially low. Artificially low means you are asking people, look, even the demand increases, I am going to supply you dollars at 130 rupees or 200 rupees. So basically someone like me, or whoever who wants to buy a phone, which is a luxury item or a discretionary item, I will come with rupees, and even I will go to the bank and take a loan in rupees, and I will come and ask dollars to import more. So basically you are allowing to import more by keeping this rate artificially low. By fixing that, you are basically allowing the importers and exporters both. And someone like Channa may be thinking, why should I bring my dollars to the market to buy it, like sell it at 130 or 200 rupees, while this is actually, valuing more than 200 rupees. So you are creating a massive discrepancy. You are influencing people to import more, and you are discouraging people like exporters not to bring the dollars. But Channa will do that as long as he can buy the dollars at the same rate. But the moment he realizes, my goodness, there are no dollars in the market, he may think twice, why should I bring my all valuable dollars to the country? So then there's a shortage created. So answering Sharaka's problem, whether we have to cut down imports and all that, at this point, I agree, you have to cut down. I mean, we are already cutting it down by medicine and fuel and all the essential goods, because we don't have an option. But the ideal way is to look at it from the exchange rate policy and balance it. And that's why I constantly say, till you fix your exchange rate, none of these reforms will work, because that is paramount important to fix it. Otherwise, all reforms will go completely on waste, because without fixing that, nothing else is possible to fix.
Great. Thank you very much, Dana. That was like very insightful, and it was very comprehensive. Like my last question for the session, I'm just going to ask this from Mr. Shanna. It's from a viewer. It says, like, do you expect further high prices in shipping, or have we hit the maximum level?
Tough question, but freight rates have been coming down recent past.
Okay.
So it has come to a settled level right now. I don't see it is going up to the level what it was like 4 months ago, where the rates were pretty high. Not even in the, but there are a lot of volatility in the global. As I said at the very beginning, COVID is putting his head up again, and then we have a war. There's no end to it. We don't see a real end to it. So because of volatility, you cannot really predict and say it will not go up, but in the near future, I don't see it's going up. Probably there'll be some stability, but that again depends on the region. For also, for example, sometime you will see rates to US or North America going up, but then some stability in places to Europe. And sometimes you will see your inbound rates increasing and not the exports. But overall, what I can predict is it will not go to the levels what it was, the highest level some time back. So it will be there at this level. It will be there for a while.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Shamna. Dhanat, there is one last question, just like we can take 2 minutes and then wrap the session off. Could you briefly explain whether introduction of a gold coin, like what Zimbabwe did recently, would help Sri Lanka to curb inflation? That's the question being asked again from Charit.
Yeah, so what happens is basically that's why I said when your currency becoming worthless, either one option is one option in the sense unavoidable circumstances, the economy automatically dollarize. People only accept payments in dollars, and then people asked to pay only in dollars. I had a friend in Zimbabwe, so he said the same thing. He said once he got his salary on a Friday, he couldn't deposit it in the bank. He said, he just gave it as an example. He said, imagine my salary was $300 worth. On Monday, it was just $30 worth. So that was the inflation that Zimbabwe went through. So what he did was, what they were doing, what mainly these middle class in Zimbabwe doing, they can open a bank account in South Africa. So these people are traveling to South Africa, run a offshore account, and all of their money, they are parking it outside. And when it's like the black market in petrol. When things are not going right, automatically black markets are created. So it's happening for the currency as well. If your currency is becoming worthless, people are trying to keep it in something valuable. So that's why Zimbabwe had to go to these gold coins. Actually, this is not new. If you look at now, earlier at the very early days, that is why we didn't have a currency problem, because what we used were gold or silver coins. So when you're using a gold coin, actually the value of that gold is in that coin. So you have to mint coins. So actually there are some economic activity happening, and that is given in that coin. So when you're transacting with that gold coin, that means actually you are exchanging something value for that coin. But what happened was we kept that, we went to the fiat currency. So basically what we exchange is worthless paper, but the trust is given like 5,000 or whatever, $100 or something. So then they have to go back to the fundamentals. So that's what happened. For Sri Lanka, if we don't save the currency, that could happen. I'm not ruling it out, but for the moment, I don't think it will happen, but it won't happen also overnight. It's like a gradual process. And that's why people, as we all know, when the crisis hits, a lot of people who had money, doctors, lawyers, and those who had money, they exchange actually to their rupees to dollars, or they bought gold just to make sure that their wealth is not depreciating with inflation. So that is what is basically happening if you don't save the currency, and that's why the interest rates have been jacked up for historic high levels to cut down the inflation, because if the inflation was allowed to do, then our options are limited.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that answer, Dhanat. So yeah, with that question, we draw this webinar to a conclusion. We again thank two amazing guests, two industry experts, the CEO of Explologics, Mr. Channa Gunawardena. Thank you very much for joining with us today.
My pleasure.
And the COO of Advocata, Mr. Dhanat Fernando. Thank you very much to you too for joining with us today. Thank you so much. We hope this session has been very useful to you, all of the viewers from across our platforms. And we'll catch you on our next episode. Until then, you stay safe. And thank you everyone for joining with us today, and have a great day ahead. Thank you.